Welcome to everyone to today's session, and thank you for, I assume, taking time out of watching the incredible Olympic coverage. I know that's what I've been doing for the last couple of days, and it's been amazing. Just like the Olympics, we have a truly international audience again today, so thanks for tuning in from wherever you are. And I really hope your team is doing really well wherever you are as well. Team GB are doing really well, so we're really pleased here. So we are thrilled to have our own Olympic standard expert with us today, and he is the boardroom architect, Mark A. Pfister. So he's going to be hosting and taking us through today's session. He's back for another one, and it was so well received last time, so thanks so much, Mark, for that. So first, before we hand over to Mark, I'm just going to give you a quick intro to myself and to Shaparency, who's the hosts for this session today. So my name's Lucy, and I'm the events manager for Shaparency. Shaparency's aim is to shake up the board management and performance sector. The boardroom is the last frontier of digitalization, with less than 15% of boards using specific tools to manage their board processes. So Shaparency's aim is to change that. So Shaparency manage every aspect of your board meeting on our secure cloud platform. We store all your documents, prepare and share agendas, compile board packs, digitalize your minutes, your votes, sign documents, and soon you'll even be able to manage your board's performance. We are hosting these events, and we're getting these experts in from all over, with our hope being that we can educate people on board processes and hopefully aim for a more inclusive, more diverse, and ultimately more efficient board. So without further ado, I'll just take you through some of the quick techie things and the purpose of today's session. So Mark's going to be taking us through the elements to elevate your chances to land a seat on that all-important board. So we have Mark here today, so let's put him to work, let's grill him, and let's get some questions in. So please, whatever your question, pop it in the Q&A box, and we will try and go through as many of those at the end of the session as possible. If we don't, we had so many questions last time that we didn't manage to get to them all, so Mark replied to those by email, so we definitely will get your question answered, whether it's in the live session at the end or via email. The session is being recorded, and Shaparency, myself, will email out a recording of the session and the notes, the slides from today's session, so you will get that in an email afterwards, along with more details about Mark and Shaparency. You'll notice that there are links throughout the presentation. You'll get the slides and you'll be able to click through those so you can delve deeper into related topics in your own time afterwards. So yeah, that will come with the follow-up email. So enough from me. Without further ado, I will introduce our speaker for today. You know him as the board architect, and it's Mark A. Pfister. He's a government and strategy expert, board director, board consultant, having consulted and advised on hundreds of public, private and non-profit boards. His book, Across the Board, The Modern Architecture Behind an Effective Board of Directors, is a bestseller with a circulation in over 70 countries. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark and he will begin today's session. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoy it. And don't forget to put those questions in the question boxes.
Thank you to you, Lucy, and to Ben, and obviously the entire Shaparency staff. You guys have been great. It's a lot of fun doing these webinars with all of you as well. So thank you so much. All right, let's get started. Obviously, we're here today to talk about how do you ensure your seat on the board. And I'd like to look at this from really two viewpoints. One is from the viewpoint of the board candidate. And when I say board candidate, I mean both as an aspiring director as well as an experienced director. Both of those scenarios will put you in the in a situation where you are applying for and being vetted for board seats, whether you're extremely experienced or on the aspiring side. So how do you truly make that impression? If you don't already know somebody on that board, or you don't know someone who's doing the folks that are doing the vetting process, how do you actually get them to say yes to get you to the immediate hurdle, which some will argue is the toughest part of the process, which is to get to that interview, that first interview. So we're going to talk about this in a way of how do you ensure getting to the interview and then ultimately ensuring your seat on the board. And I want to talk about 3 areas for this. One is preparing your expertise, experience, and certifications, something that I like to call your career trifecta. Number 2 is proper board candidate packaging. How are you being viewed as someone who is an expert in your space? You are a disciplined board director, not a hobbyist. And that really is a very simple way to describe folks and how they present themselves. And then if you do hopefully get to the interview, which I think your chances will increase with some of the methodologies that I'll talk about today, how do you actually ace that board interview when you get to it? And there's some interesting things I think I can bring to the table for our discussion today on this. All right, so let's start out with this concept of having a career strategy. And first thing I think about in this is that we go through this process, whether we know it or not, for all other positions, except for board roles or board positions. And really it's gained more traction in recent years because of the need for a more formal process of not only attracting, but vetting and appointing the best board directors that we could possibly need for the boards that we're serving on. So think about this in this way when you talk about your own career trifecta. Expertise obviously is what you know. The experience is how you've applied it. So we've touched already on 2 areas of this triangle of this career trifecta. Most board directors, I should say many board directors, have either forgotten or not put the proper amount of effort and emphasis on what I like to call this proof area or certification. You could really say education and certification as part of this. And there's a few things I particularly look for in this. Many people that come to the boardroom for an interview, they're able to show their expertise, what they know, they're able to show their experience and how they've applied it. But they struggle in making the correlation back to the ongoing education components. And we're going to touch on that ongoing education component, or what I like to call the learning mentality in a few moments in another section of today's discussion. But showing that you have this drive for education and hopefully looking for areas that also show that you have expertise in that space through the certification or the title that you get with those education areas. That really is a great way to show this balance in your career trifecta. And use this as a way also to get that balance. Not everybody has balance in this right now. As an example, the education and certifications that they have currently may actually not be up to the same level that their expertise and their experience is. So there's a balance in this of saying, okay, for this particular year, I'm going to focus on elevating the education areas that lead to certifications that create that balance across my career trifecta. It's a very easy way to understand if a board candidate, again, aspiring or experienced, is looking at board directorship as a discipline and again, not a hobby. So this is extremely important. It's something I look for in much of the vetting processes I do with nominating committees. And it shows that that person is dedicated and views the seriousness of their position and adds the component of education and certification into that. Notice how I'm saying certification and not certificates. And I do view them as slightly different, meaning that certificates usually is you take the course once, you get your certificate, and you have that certificate for the rest of your life. Certification to me is a little bit different because you are commonly honing your skills and your knowledge and in some cases getting your continuing professional education credits to keep that certification active. I personally put a little more emphasis on that because I know that person has made a longer term commitments to the board director vertical by showing these certifications. So I know that they have some sort of aspect of ongoing education and continuing their knowledge growth. So one area we talk about it obviously in this career strategy is this career trifecta. Another thing to think about is having a career brand, right? So it wasn't that long ago when board directors were kind of these shadowy figures that they didn't have to market themselves, right? They already were with the in crowd. They sat on multiple boards, and once you landed your first board seat, you had the opportunity to sit on many more, as many as you could possibly want. That wasn't that long ago. Today's world is a little bit different. Unless your name is Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, you do have to create a brand, your own brand around your name as it relates to board directorship. Similarly to you would do with whatever your career, your current career is, or your current title, whether you know it or not, you're creating a brand around that particular expertise that you have. It really is no different in the board director space. You should be doing these things that elevate your relevance or show your relevance as a disciplined board director. So different ways you can do this. I like to equate this all back to what's called establishing your authority. By doing things that establish your authority, which is typically through sharing of information. This webinar is a prime example, right? So I'm sharing information today. I want to be viewed as someone who knows what they're talking about. That builds up the relevance aspect of it, and that draws people into me to say, well, maybe we should talk to Mark about XYZ for our board. So how do you do this? The best way to do this, and the simplest way to do this, is to find this balance between establishing your authority and the marketing components. And if you're doing those kind of in that overlap area, you're doing something right, because it shouldn't feel like you're marketing at all. It should feel simply like you're sharing information. So some areas to think about that help you support creating this brand and then elevating your relevance for board director opportunities. You don't have to do all of these. Know that some of these may not be for you personally, but there's always things that you can get involved with here. So speaking engagements is a big one. This can be as an individual or joining a panel discussion that's board related. Writing articles is another big area. Again, you're educating in this space. Getting quoted, a very easy way. You'd be amazed at the number of publications in the senior leadership, C-level, and board space that are searching constantly to get your inputs on your expertise areas. So getting quoted is a very easy way to do that, and takes a couple of minutes to put a quote together for an article on that particular topic. The networking component, I want to make sure I'm clear about this. The networking component to me is not just about joining a group and handing out business cards. This to me is really about structuring your strategy in the organizations and the types of events that you want to attend that allow you the proper types of connections. So board groups that are very open with their communication, and it's not just one person speaking and then everybody else listening, but the networking component being this group and open type of communication where you really get to know those folks. You'd be amazed at the expertise that's sitting within these groups, that if you dig a little further into it, some of the connections you can make are absolutely incredible. The education and certification associations. My organization is a prime example of this, where the introductions we make to those that go through our program, we make the introductions to the other members that have gotten and graduates of the program. It's a great way, again, to meet people that are very much focused in a specific industry vertical, such as board directorship. Teaching kind of, to me, is the overall umbrella. I believe that any type of marketing you're doing should be in the form of inbound content marketing, which basically means you're teaching. It's drawing people to you because you're being viewed as the expert or someone providing information on a specific topic. So teaching to me is the overall umbrella. Proper board documents. We're going to talk about this in a moment. It's not sending a CV or resume for a board seat. Those are designed for other types of positions, right? So whether someone asks you for a board CV or a board bio or a board resume, you should immediately click that switch in your head and say, okay, they're asking for a CV or resume for a board role, but you know you're going to send a little bit of a slightly structured, differently structured document to properly represent yourself as senior leadership in the boardroom. And then, of course, lastly, there's probably a host of other examples in this thought leadership realm. I see many of those folks that are searching for board seats looking to get involved in the writing of white papers. There's tons of organizations right now that are doing studies, whether it be on remuneration or compensation or trending, modern trending in the boardroom. These are easy areas to jump on to help out with some of the data research in these particular areas. All of this is leading towards this board director brand, which creates your relevance. And it's not just about you listing a C-level or any level position to back up your claim that you're a great board director. You want to show that you're more involved in that industry or that vertical of board directorship, which is a great way to create the brand and to get your name out there simultaneously. All right. So just a quick thing on using the correct terminology for this. People asking for, organizations asking for board resumes and board CVs. It's not going to go away, but just know that in the background, you as a savvy board candidate, whether aspiring or experienced, it's regardless of that, know that what they're really asking you for is a properly structured board bio and a properly structured board document. And you can see how this is laid out here. When someone asks for your board documents or your board resume or CV, you should be sending a properly structured board bio and what's called a board document. I have a link here that you can get to later, talking about the mistakes board candidates make. And I believe it's the next slide, you'll see a link to talk very high level about what that particular board document looks at and how you should structure it. Basically the 6 sections that you should be looking at and the order of those sections for your board documents. This is a big differentiator, I'll tell you, for those of us such as me who are purists in the board space, meaning that we're looking for really, what is the acumen of this particular board candidate? Are they truly not just claiming to be a great board director, but they've also done the research on understanding how to correctly package themselves? And a prime example of something that I do, I'm commonly called in to advise and to consult on the building of nominating committee processes. And in many cases, those same organizations will ask me to stick around for the vetting, right? To help them whittle down a group of, or 800 submissions, I think is the most recent one I've been working on. And you may say to yourself, well, 800 submissions, how do you whittle that down to, maybe 10 people? I can tell you I can get through about 700 submissions in about 2 days, right off the bat for the 800 submissions total. I can get through 700 just by initially whittling down those that actually name the title of their file a resume or CV. I already know that they haven't done the research in the background to understand they're not truly called that. The true definition is called board documents. So I can whittle down a large amount of that, maybe go back to some of them later, but just know that the terminology and the discipline behind the packaging of proper board directorship is extremely important, especially if you want to stand out and make a great first impression. I mentioned a moment ago, and the article link is here. You'll get this this presentation along with the video. Lucy will send this out very shortly following this particular webinar, but in that particular version of the deck, your presentation deck, you'll be able to click on these links to get to these articles as well. But again, just a reminder, your board document is not the same as a resume or CV. It's laid out slightly different. And the reason that you don't want to use a normal resume or CV format is that, remember, those particular formats were designed for more of a employee type role or a management type role. When you're applying for more of a senior leadership level role, and that can be for SVP and above, SVP or C-level, or of course in the boardroom, you want a different format. You don't want something that drives you down the path of giving all the tactical and task type information, right? You want to boil that all down and rise all up to the top on the main components of your service in the areas that you've led. So again, the format of a resume or CV, it doesn't make you, just based on its format, it doesn't make you seem like senior leadership or governance material, or as I like to add in there, strategic material, right? So put the proper effort into your board documents. And it does, again, give this feeling that you've already arrived, you have a background in this, you spent the time and the research to understand how to present yourself and stand out. It shows that this is a discipline for you, once again, and not a hobby. All right, so some important considerations, again, in the link earlier, you'll see a little more detail, more in a written type article format for this, but just know at a high level, your board bio, you're really trying to get across in this is your personal touch. You'll also see a reference to that personal touch, or what I like to call your core leadership traits, in your board documents. And you'll see that at the bottom of the right-hand list there, where it says your differentiator is to list your core leadership traits and demeanor, right? To me, one of the most poignant phrases or statements I've heard in a very long time is a phrase by the founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings, and he says, nobody wants to work with the brilliant jerk, right? So what does that actually mean if we break that down? It means that there are a lot of brilliant people out there, but they're not able to work in a group type environment. Let's think about that in the board space for a moment. If you're brilliant, but you can't work with other people, how is that going to work on a board? So as part of the process of truly evaluating, even before I, as an evaluator, say, I want this person to come in for an interview, what is your differentiator above and beyond just your expertise and your experience, right? And I want to get a feel for who you are. I don't want to waste time, especially with the number of submissions that you get today for a board seat. I don't want to waste time on people that are brilliant, but they're not able to work in a group environment. They don't have the EQ or the MQ. We'll talk about that in a moment. So know that, again, a big differentiator in how you create your board bio and your board document is that you're trying to get across your leadership style, your ability to work with teams, and the fact that you've honed your approach in working with other people and communicating effectively. So I won't read through every area here, but you get the gist of where I'm going with this, is that there's an order to these documents that I think make great sense. There's a way to have a differentiator in how you present yourself. And even in the board document, you'll see here at a high level, the order of this is not the same as you would compare to a resume or CV. You're starting, yes, with a board profile. I view this as a very precise and concise writing process, but you'll see some examples of how I describe that in the article. Board and board committee experience. So you're not just jumping down first and foremost to an area that says, okay, here's the date that I was this title in an organization. You want to jump right into the fact that you've either served on a board or you have board committee experience. But don't despair if you don't have board or board committee experience, because most executives or those SVP level and above have what's called board level experience. Interactions where you've served, or I'm sorry, probably wrong word to use, but you've interacted or presented to a board, right? You've provided information that's been rolled up to a board. Those are examples of board level experience that you should not exclude from a proper board document. Executive experience, of course, shouldn't be surprised that the education, certifications, memberships, and professional affiliations come up here. This is a prime example in a relationship back to what we just talked about earlier in your career trifecta. And then, of course, this differentiator that I mentioned a moment ago, which is how do you get across this feeling of who you are personally, what's important to you. You can do that by listing out or infusing, or both, infusing this core leadership traits and demeanor of how you are and how you operate as a leader into both your board bio and your board document. This is really what makes the personalization and the feeling that somebody knows you before they meet you. This is really the feel you want to get from these documents. Again, resumes and CVs were not designed for that. And they obviously don't do you any favors to submit those types of formats for what I view as the most coveted board seats that are compensated. I have a feeling there'll be some questions about that area. Another area that I'll go into here at a high level, I'll mention again that at the end of this webinar today, we'll talk a little more about the education and certification program that we host. Shaparency happens to be an education partner of ours in this, so it could be an interesting option for those that are truly looking for the fast track and understanding how to do all of this properly. But I want to give you the high level of this when we talk about important board document considerations. So remember that you do not want to be viewed or be looked at as that one-trick pony that comes in, meaning that you have one expertise area and that's really what your title states in there. I don't know, is it finance? Or you mainly only focused in HR? That again is the way that you would formulate a resume or CV. You would show that all of your experience, or much of your experience, and everything you've been involved with supports and focuses on that main title area that you've been. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a major. In fact, in most cases, boards want someone that has a major that they focused in for a significant amount of time, because of the whole notion that unless you have 10,000 plus hours into something, you can never call yourself an expert, right? That truly is part of the definition of being an expert, is that 10,000 hours of applied time in a specific area. So how do you actually now show that you're not the one-trick pony, right, with just your major? And how do you show now that you also you bring depth to the board, and you bring the ability to elevate the board And typically how you elevate the board is by being an active member and participant in the workhorse of the boards, which is their committees. Board committees are where the work should be getting done, not in the boardroom, right? So this is where we migrate into what we call your three minors. And your three minors in your packaging should be very clearly associated with common board committees. Now, we picked three in this for a few reasons. One is that the human mind remembers in threes. So it's not by chance that many of the things that I do personally, they're done in threes. It's just how the human brain works. Great example of this is that if we look back to a famous speech by Winston Churchill, we all remember blood, sweat, and tears from that speech. That's what all you hear today in sports and other areas. But there was actually a fourth word in that when he did it in his speech. It was blood, sweat, tears, and toil, right? But nobody remembers the toil aspect because most people remember in threes, right? And that's a prime example of this packaging yourself properly and trying to align yourself, your minors, to this concept of threes. Now, what does this do? If you look at my example right here, you see my major. My major is focused in senior level leadership areas, and also I like to put in there the consulting aspect of this because it allows me a little bit of that depth of showing both the corporate side on one side of the table and then sitting as a consultant on the other side of the table. I think consultancy is a great thing to list if you have it in your background because it shows that as a consultant, you're actually never the boss. So you have to have confidence, but you also have to be able to listen to your clients, right? Then an extremely important part, as I mentioned, is your three minors. How do you take what my major is and then also apply that in a way that can be associated with common board committees? Mine particularly are focused in strategy, governance, and technology cybersecurity. So on many boards, and I actually would personally never sit on a board myself if it didn't have a strategic planning committee. I think it's that important. So strategy can be associated directly to strategic planning committee. Governance can be associated not just to the overall board, but directly to a governance committee, right? And the technology component I show there specifically because some boards don't have a technology or a cybersecurity committee, but they want that expertise on their board. So whether or not they have a formal committee or not, I know that that's an area that is of importance today, and I know that will stand out in the way I've packaged myself. All right, so think about all of these areas, your major and your minors also as having a direct correlation to what we spoke about a little bit earlier of your career trifecta. How do I prove that I not only have expertise and experience in these spaces, but do I also have certifications or formal education? In my case, the answer is yes. You want to look at this in a very well-rounded way and say also, if you were to package yourself today with a major and three minors as it relates to board directorship, how do you fill in that last area of proof or the education and certification to show that you're viewing yourself as a disciplined board director, not a hobbyist? Super important to do this. It shows that you bring more than just one area of expertise to the board. And when we talk about board architecture, which is written about in my book behind me here, this is of major importance on the board's side of the table to say, how are we building our board correctly? How are we getting that depth? You can do that by searching for candidates such as you who bring more than just one expertise area to that board by correlating their focus and their efforts into the three minor areas. Probably be a few questions about that as well when we get to it. So, all right. So remember in this board candidate packaging, package yourself properly and also understand that the process of board recruitment is not the same process as getting a full-time job. And what I mean by that is that you are presenting yourself in a different way. You're showing that you not only have the acumen and have done the research on how to properly package yourself, but you're showing by doing that your dedication to the board director space, or what I like to say is the board director vertical. It truly is a vertical in an industry itself. Keep your board documents up to date, right? So I love this quote by the actor Will Smith: "Stay ready so you ain't got to get ready." Perfect way to view this, right? Your board documents are something you should be visiting on a monthly basis and reviewing to say, if I have to go to an interview tomorrow, can I properly represent myself in multiple areas, in the major and the minor areas? If I get questioned about my background in one of my minor areas, remember that correlate to your affiliated or board committees that you add value? Can I show that I've actually gone for additional education in those spaces? Can I prove those things, right? Proof your own packaging in this way. So it's a way to even think about how you go about the decisioning process for your education and certifications on a yearly basis. Commonly, the end-to-end board placement process can take on average between 3 months. I'll tell you that's extremely fast, to 2+ years. I know folks that have been searching for board seats for over 8 years. The problem is they have not put any effort into packaging themselves properly, and they don't have a great network, so they never make it to the first hurdle, which is the interview. Make no mistake, I believe getting to the first interview is actually harder than getting the board appointment. So focus on that initial impression of packaging yourself properly to get to the interview, and then be fully prepared for that interview. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but know that there's so much detail to that. If you truly want to drill down into that, we can talk about the program that we host at the end of this webinar. In the process, it's very important to be able to stand out early. I just mentioned this. Look prepared and present yourself as a candidate that use board directorship as a discipline. You've heard me say that a few times throughout today's webinar. And aim to get to the interview. Once you present your expertise, experience, and certifications through proper board documents, you have a much higher chance of getting to that first interview. View this as a process that has steps to it, right? And it's a very competitive area, especially for both the private and public compensated board seats. So how do you go about doing this properly? Spend the effort early on to package yourself, get to the interview, be prepared for that interview, and that will increase your chances greatly. So I can't stress these particular points enough. All right, so let's assume you've done all this correctly. You got awesome looking board documents, you prepared for the interview, you understand the background of the board, how the board is architected, why they're asking for you to come in, where you fit above and beyond what they may view as their sole area of requested expertise. You know now you can add more additional value to that board. Where do you go next with this? So these are some things that I look at as the observables, or areas that I think that some of the best board candidates, aspiring or experienced, this is how they position themselves. So this is true of whether or not they are asked questions that can be specifically related back to these, which I do in some cases in asking these questions. But I want to see also that a candidate is driving their discussion to these particular areas during their discussion. So during the interview, I want to make sure that they themselves know the importance of these areas. So number one, for those that have attended my webinars over the years, you already know that values is going to be first there. Somebody's personal values should be equated and overlaid to the business and the organization's values, because the importance of that is that it sets the culture of the organization. Make no mistake, the board owns the culture of the organization. Most people will argue that, well, the CEO does. And my response to that is that the board selects the CEO, and the CEO enforces the values, which creates the culture in the organization. So if you think about it that way, the board should be evaluating either a CEO or another board director as having ownership of the values of the organization. A board candidate should be easily able to know their values and the values of the organization that they are a candidate for the board for, and be able to overlay those and make the correlation directly in the interview. I'm extremely skeptical of board candidates that do not talk about values in the first 2, 3, or even 4 sentences of an interview. I already know that they don't understand the relationship of values to culture, to governance, to strategy. That to me is one of the foundational understandings of governance and strategy, and it has to be at the topmost priority for board directors. Number 2, where exactly do you fit? Most boards will tell you where they think you fit when they call you in, but many of them are telling you the major area, right? So we need someone with X experience. They're not saying X, Y, and Z experience, they're saying X experience. You want to come to the table prepared to not only show the fit to that main area they're asking for, but show the depth, show the ability for you to be involved in multiple areas, and multiple areas of where the work gets done on a board, which are the committees. And that's full circle back to what I mentioned a moment ago on your minors, your 3 minor areas. Strategy and governance, just mentioned this a moment ago. To me, know that you cannot properly govern something if you don't understand the strategy. The strategy is the how. Once the goals are set for the organization, the board essentially essentially at its core is governing the delivery of the strategy in support of the goals. So think about this right now. If you're sitting on a board and the topic of strategy never comes up, I have no idea how you're actually governing. It's impossible to do that. So a board candidate will typically fail in the following question that I ask. This is it. I'm gonna give you the secret behind this, the interview right now, or at least for my interviews. I ask the following question. Tell me your understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance. If you have any hesitation in answering that question, I already know that you're not prepared to serve on a board because you don't understand how governance works. Make sure you fully understand that. This is an area, again, that in our coursework of the program we provide, we go in depth into this relationship. I'm going to touch on this in a moment when we break these down. Learning mentality is another area. Have you viewed the fact that you've joined a board, that you've reached the epitome of your career and there's no need for more learning? Obviously, that's not the case. I believe the need for learning is exponential after that. And the other intelligences we'll touch on in a moment, which really has to do with EQ and MQ, and I'll focus on that in just a second. So values, again, if we talk about the elements and break this down a little bit, the values, what we stand for. You can't really govern or strategize for an organization if you don't understand what the values are, or if those values are not aligned to you. So what do we stand for? What are those ethics, principles, and beliefs? Number one. Notice how that sits above the vision and the mission of the organization. Number two, what's the exact fit? Where do you fit? This goes back to the concept of board architecture. A lot of information here. I'm not really quite sure where to start because it's tons of information. We could talk for hours about this, but at the very least, what is your fit on the board with your major? And again, as I mentioned, what additional areas do you bring to the show, which are your minors? This strategy and governance component, this is a visual I put together years ago and have honed it over the years to say, listen, what is the simplest way to view strategy? And what is the overlays of strategy to governance? So think about it this way. At its simplest form, strategy sits between your goals and the tasks or the milestones that the company or the organization needs to achieve. Strategy is truly the how. Simple way to look at it. But as a board director, how are you correlating the what and the why as the goals, the how is the strategy, and the when and the who is the tasks or the milestones, right? You easily overlay that with the responsibility areas of saying that the board has to understand, or a board candidate has to understand, that as part of the goals, they're helping to set and ensure the relevance of the goals. And as part of the strategy, the governance aspect, they're validating the approach. Typically, the leads of the organization are going to come up with what they propose and get approved as the strategy, but the board now has the understanding that they should be validating that approach on an ongoing basis. This is truly the highest, most level breakdown of what governance and strategy looks like for a board director. This is what I, as a board interviewer or involved in the nominating and vetting process, this is what I'm trying to get out of you as a board candidate. Make sure you understand this, especially if you're sitting in front of me. If I'm in the vetting process, I'm going to drill down into this to make sure the understanding is there. Board directors that don't understand this are not truly board directors in my mind. Board directors, if we go to element 4, the learning mentality, right? Board directors who prioritize learning, they show, again, the discipline and not a hobby approach to their role. They understand the board vertical is quickly changing and evolving. It's one of them, probably the fastest changing area right now of any of the executive or executive level and above leadership spaces. So the learning component of this is hugely important. It shows your commitment to the profession and your role, and an increasing value to companies served. You'll see right now in public companies, a prime example is our certification title. We see this being listed more and more in the proxy statements of public organizations globally. Why are they doing that? They're trying to make sure that their stakeholders and shareholders of those organizations get a comfort level that these board directors are not just this old school mentality of I'm here now, I'm going to work and do what I got to do. But they're viewed also as knowing that they have to evolve and they have to change. So you want to get across this learning mentality and know that companies above and beyond on your side of the career trifecta, they're also looking to show their relevance in their board directors and their selection processes, that they're going more deeply in the vetting process. All right. Element number 5, I started on this a moment ago, but just a little more detail, the other intelligences, right? So IQ is a given. You would hope that someone you're working with has a high IQ. I like to apply this more so to their IQ in a specific industry vertical and the board directorship vertical, right? But the 2 other areas here that I view of utmost importance, the EQ, the emotional intelligence area, how are you responding and accepting of criticism and pushback? How do you not get caught up in some sort of vicious cycle that escalates? You know, that to me is truly drilling down into the emotional intelligence area. And the mindfulness intelligence area, more on the proactive side of this. How are you positioning and presenting topics to the remainder of the board or anybody else in a leadership type role, right? Are you aware of other circumstances and situations that may actually change how you present this? So that's the mindfulness side and the proactive side. The adversity intelligence, which is mainly correlated to someone's grit. I like to think that all board directors should have some sort of, or some level of deep grit, right? How they're going to persevere in any type of situation that comes up. But to me, it's almost a given they should have the AQ or the adversity intelligence for their grit. But just know when it comes to a board operating what I view as not only correctly, but thriving, the EQ and the MQ evaluation areas are truly what fortifies the approach for communication and the camaraderie of that particular board. Hugely important. You want to show as a board candidate that you are intimately aware of the components of EQ and MQ to show how you're going to bring this balance and this maturity in your approach to that existing board. All right, as we start to get close to the end now, if you're interested in all the core principles, as we started to talk about board architecture, you can read about this in my book. Through my experiences in the consulting and the advisory world in the board directorship space, I can tell you that 90+% of issues that boards experience are emanating from the fact that they're not structured or architected properly. So to me, that in itself would say that as a great board candidate, you truly want to understand how a great board is built, not just a proper board, but a great board, and use that information and that knowledge as a way to evaluate if a potential board you're thinking about joining is actually going to be a great experience for you. Or do you go in knowing that you may have to help them to structure their board or restructure their board a little better than it is today? But to me, it's extremely important to understand the proper aspects of the architecture of effective and efficient boards. And you can put this into your repertoire of the types of questions you would ask during an interview. I've alluded to a few times in this particular webinar, many of the topics that we're just touching and scratching the surface of today to give you the path and the understanding of areas to focus on. Maybe some you're doing today, maybe some you weren't aware of. If you want to see all of these integrated into one program, 12 modules, 12 weeks, Shaparency is one of our recent education partners and certification partners in the space. You can see all about that, our particular education and global certification on this particular link, which you'll have access to shortly. All right, just in wrapping up before we get to Q&A, Lucy, a reminder to approach your board candidate packaging and your candidacy, your board candidacy in a disciplined manner. Don't just think that it's luck. It has nothing to do with luck. It's all about your preparation in this. Understand the differences and how you want to go about differentiating yourself to make it to the top of that pile. Get to the interview. That is the differentiator goal you want to aim for. Don't focus firstly on the appointment to the seat. Focus on the proper packaging, getting to your interview. That is the most important component of all of this. You can use this presentation as a roadmap. Know, again, if you wanted more detail on this, you can take this to whatever level you want, inclusive of becoming an expert in all of these areas through our education program. And know through all of this, you have to be someone who embraces change. Don't just think that because it works for you in the past or worked for you in the past, it's going to work for you in the future. Know that the way that boards are evaluating and vetting candidates, and not just experienced candidates, but aspiring candidates, have huge opportunities today to join boards they could never think about in the past, because boards are open to the diversity of multiple areas, including of age ranges and experience ranges on those boards currently. So embrace this time of change in the board director vertical. All right, Lucy, I've been doing a lot of talking. I hope I haven't bombarded people with too much information, but that is the roadmap of how to package yourself properly, what you should be looking for. And me, as someone on both sides of the table, what I'm actually drilling down into with some hidden questions to see if a board candidate knows these areas. So
such an amazing amount of information. I mean, Mark was telling me beforehand, everyone, he doesn't use notes. That is all just there on the tip of his tongue, ready to go. It's just incredible. Thank you so much for that. And so we have got a few questions, but we've definitely got time for a few more. So if you did have something you were thinking about asking, pop it in the question box now and we can come to it. First, as always, there's a question about, will the slides be available? They will, and I will email those. I think the email will go out tomorrow, so we'll download the video that will be available to you, and all the slides with all the links. So to the first question, this is from Paul. With respect to the board bio, if the candidate has actual experience of board membership, is it still beneficial to also mention board level experience, i.e. presenting to the board or an executive, or if you have board membership, should the board level experiences be excluded in this case?
Great question. Great question.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something to think about as I answer this is that I want to see balance in how somebody presents themselves. So do I like to see somebody who may have 20 years of experience also list their board level experience? It truly is up to you how you want to do that. But what you're always trying to get across is this balance that it's very easy. I guess a better way to say this is the following. It's very easy for a board director to be viewed as somebody who has only been on one side of the table for a very long time and may be viewed as not having the understanding and the viewpoint of the other side of the table. So I love it when I see the board level experience in some way, because it allows me to get an understanding of that person's balance. Have they been insulated only on one side of the board table for a long time? And if I see that, I may actually ask, it doesn't knock you out from the running in my example, but I may ask you a question to see if you are not one of those board directors that's become so insulated because you only sat on one side of the table for so long, you don't know how it is now to present to a board, or what types of questions somebody that is preparing to present to the board may have. So always think about the way you present yourself in a mindful manner, which is a thoughtful manner, which shows the balance and the structure of many different aspects and entry points to how you present yourself. I hope that answers the question. It truly is a preference. It's up to you, but I give the guidelines of the areas that I think show an extremely well-rounded candidate. Most board directors, even after many years of doing this, they may still have very relevant examples that they can give to their board level experience, as well as some other areas I can't even think of right now, but even down to certifications and educations they've done in the past that may actually strike up conversation or interest during an interview.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm just muting myself between each one because there's a funny noise. I hope you can't hear it. Sorry if you can.
It's fine. No, I don't hear anything.
So two questions that are fairly similar. So I'll ask you them both, and then you can answer them. So another one: can you expand more upon values? I completely get where this question's coming from. Surely this is a motherhood and apple pie stuff. Everyone will claim values that they believe portray them in a favorable light, and no one will admit to poor values ever. So how does a candidate portray their values without sounding trite? I think that's such a great question.
It's a great question, and I'll tell you, what I'm going after is not that you can regurgitate the values of the organization and say you have the same ones, right? Now, it's not bad to start a conversation off that way, but what I'm getting to in that is as someone who's vetting a board candidate, I want to understand that you get the fact that you have to measure the values in the organization. So it doesn't become just this listed on the website type of thing. And if you want to know the values, nobody knows them, but they're on the website. So go take a look if you want. I want to know, as part of what's called, another great example of this is, tell me about your values-based decisioning process. Remember, as a senior level leader and a board director, the way you make a decision should start out with a comparison first and foremost to the values of the organization. This is another prime example of something that we teach in the education program I mentioned a moment ago. There's actually a repeatable process in that, where anything that's proposed to you in the boardroom or even outside the boardroom, if you're a senior level leader, you should have a decision process that includes at least the first following three steps. One is, does this question and my answer fit within the values of the organization? You would be amazed. I wrote an article, and I think there's a link in this presentation to it. Roy Disney, as an example, he actually went through a period of time in his life as a leader of Disney, right? Where he said, before I look at any data, anybody who comes to me with a question, I'm going to first look at the values of the organization and try to give an answer immediately with no other data on the values of the organization. He found out that by doing that, he was right 100% of the time, and he got the data later that supported that as part of his test. It's a great article. I forget the name of it, but it's in here. I think it's something having to do with the something having, again, with values. You'll see the link in this particular presentation when you get it. But to me, I want to show, or I want you to show me that you understand, similarly to governance and the linkage to strategy, I want you to show me that you understand also that you cannot be great at governance if you don't understand how values affects the culture, which has a direct correlation back to risk. If you look at the number of areas of risk that boards deal with today that relate directly back to values and culture of the organization, you'd be amazed at the percentage of that. It's extremely high. It is a breakdown of the values of the organization. I write in my book about Uber, right? Uber had issues because they had a breakdown of values in the organization, which led to a cultural breakdown, which increased their risk, which led to all the upheaval we saw in Uber some years back. So you have to be able to show as a senior level leader that the values comparison and your values-based decisioning model starts with a values comparison, then a comparison to the vision of the organization, what you want to do in the future, what you want to enable or do in the future, and then comparing it to the mission of the organization, what you do well now. That order of things, you'd be amazed at the number of things you can just jettison off of your to-do list by saying it doesn't fit with one of those areas, so we're not going to spend time on it. My answer is no. It's another way of showing that you as a senior level leader, and especially as a board director, you have a way of prioritizing decisions, which tells me also that you're great at time management if you can show me your values-based decisioning process.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that was the other question actually, was speak a little bit more about value-based decisions. So that's answered that really nicely, thank you. So a question from Matthew, how does a video cover letter differ from a traditional cover letter? Should it just be a video version, or is this a great opportunity to use the medium in to better showcase yourself?
I think it's a great question, and I'll tell you, I've warmed up to those more and more over the years. But I'll tell you this. It's a great way to fit within that branding aspect I mentioned earlier. If you remember that circle, the branding, which then can show the relevance. I think it's a great way for someone to get a first feel for your communication skills and how you present yourself, right? Do you come across as very cohesive in your concepts? Do you look nervous? Are you very confident without being cocky in the way you present yourself? So a video is a great way to do that. But I will tell you what I'm also very much interested in is how you present yourself in the formal process. The video process is not really the formal process right now for the presentation, or I'll say for the submission for a board seat. You're not seeing someone like me go out there and say, as in the vetting, if I got 800 submissions, I'm going to whittle down the first 700, as I mentioned, as a starting point. But am I going to go and look at a video for the remaining 100? Absolutely not. I'm just not going to have the time for that. I may if I click on a link, but it's not going to be my first stop, I'll say, for that. Great to do it. I'm not saying not to do it, but know that the prime way that you're going to make your first impression is through your board documents, a properly formulated cover letter, a properly formulated board bio next, and then your board document as your third process in that. So I'm not saying not to do it, but I don't view it as a way. I've never used that as a process to date, working with hundreds of nominating committees. Have I used that as a primary way of understanding if somebody's going to be a viable candidate? Absolutely not. Never. Okay,
so would you say do it, but make sure you do both? You have the traditional as well as the more creative.
You have to be the full package in this. You know, the board documents, the written format also gives me an idea of your communication skills, your written communication skills. It shows me that you're versed in how you convey yourself. It also has the ability to show me that you are very precise and concise right? If your board document is 15 pages long, I already know you're going to be the person in the boardroom that talks for an hour and doesn't allow anybody else to give input, right? I want you to show me that in the way that you write and convey, above and beyond if you have a video, show me that you get it. Show me that you can condense all this information down into what is board level presentation material. You do that also, and you set the tone for that in how you've built out your board documents, even the way your cover letter is structured.
Great. I'm going to rattle through. We've got a couple more, but we are slightly running out of time. But can Mark briefly talk about how a person should build a brand to get the first board role? Is it best to network directly with CEOs, recruiters, and current board members, etc.?
Yeah, I think that the best way to think about this, and again, not to keep going back to the education program, but we dedicate the session 11 and session 12 to two topics. One is, again, that concept of establishing your authority, and secondly, how to market yourself. So think of it this way. This is probably the best way in a short, condensed amount of time to mention this. Most board candidates that are either aspiring or experienced, they believe that they're going to put all their information up on a website or a database for a search and placement firm, and they're going to sit back and wait, and miraculously, they're going to get a call, right, or an email. 90+% of the board seats that are landed still to this day are not emanating from placement organizations. It's just not how it works, right? So what does that mean to you, and how do you take that, and how do I answer this question in the same shot here? You want to view yourself as the core and the center of your board directorship career, right? You don't want to give that up to anybody else. You want the inputs on this, but to do it correctly, but you remain the core of this. And then think of it as the hub. And then you have spokes that sit on the outside of this. Some of those spokes, yes, they will be placement organizations, right? But that's not your full strategy. Some of them are going to be other organizations that you're associated or affiliated with. It could be organizations that do education, or they do articles, or they're looking for quotes. They don't necessarily have to be anywhere near the realm of ending up in the placement area, right? But they have an audience of the people you want to be in front of. The point of all that, first and foremost, is that take control of your board director career. It doesn't work the old way where boards are only going out to placement organizations. Most of the board directors today are not coming in that route. They're coming in through multiple other channels, or they're being put into the process. Yes, as an example, I know people that I'll put into the process, but I wipe my hands clean after that because I don't want to be viewed as any nepotism or any favoritism. So I'll make the introduction to get them into the process, but then I step back so I'm not the one that's selling them and pushing them through. But in creating this brand, if we go back to this hub and spoke concept, in creating the brand, you have so many outlets out there. I'll give you a quick one right now where you can make great impact. I usually reserve this for the course, but I'll mention it right now. There's an organization out there called HARO, H-A-R-O. It's called Help a Reporter Out, right? That's what it stands for. Go get your name on this list. It's free. 3 times a day, you can get emails of organizations and magazines and newspapers and digital publications that are looking for quotes from people. Sign up for the area that's business and finance, I think is the one that's the most closely related. And just every day, look at those lists. They get emailed to you. It takes you 5 minutes. Go through them. Is there anything? It's a prime example of where you can be immediately added to an article anywhere in the world and establish your authority, right? Great way to do it. There's all these little tricks of how you can get involved in this. So what does it do? It gets your name out there immediately for the article, right? And their whole network of people, but also you have something else to market for yourself. Put the link up on LinkedIn. Most board search firms right now use LinkedIn as one of their main places. Make sure your LinkedIn profile, too much to go into in that, Lucy, right now, but all of this creating your brand is not just 1 or 2 ways. It's looking at this very holistically and trying to get your name out there as not just an expert in what we call, again, your major, but truly being viewed as a director or a non-executive director. How do you get to that point? It's done in a very holistic way. too much to answer, Lucy, there in our remaining seconds.
Yeah, that was great. I was going to say, you can tell when it's a great webinar because the participants stay right throughout, and we just had one person drop off just before that tip, but everyone else has been here the whole time, so they've missed that nugget that's reserved for the course. What a shame. Oh, that will teach people to stay to the end. So we have got a couple more questions, but we are running out of time. So as I mentioned at the start, Mark will get back to you by email. So that's great. If we can just go to the next the slide, which is it's our farewell slide, and thank you for joining us today, and thanks Mark so much. I mean, the amount of information that's been packed into that session is just incredible, and great tips and great answers to those questions at the end, so thank you so much for your time. Yeah, thanks for joining. You can book a demo and find out more about Shaparency at www.shaparency.com. And we're going to be doing these events more and more. We want as many experts as possible to come and speak to us. So you can find out about upcoming events at shaparency.com/events. So yeah, look, we will send you the email with all the information, the PDF and the recording. So yeah, just left for me to say thank you so much for joining again. We hope it was really useful, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Lucy. Thanks everybody.
Bye. Take care, everyone. Bye.